obviously is Microsoft and Activision-Blizzard. And what's happening here, the headline, the FTC is suing Microsoft to block its Activision-Blizzard purchase. So FTC filed a legal challenge. They're trying to block the purchase. It was filed after supposedly weeks of back and forth between Microsoft, Sony, and regulators over competition concerns and specifically the future of Call of Duty. And if you remember, Microsoft has been on sort of a PR, blast, talking about how, they're not going to make it specific to Xbox and they're trying to alleviate all these concerns. Anyways, the FTC is arguing that the acquisition, and this is quoted, would enable Microsoft to suppress competitors to its Xbox gaming consoles and its rapidly growing subscription content and cloud gaming business. Paraphrasing, the FTC is worried about Game Pass and what having Call of Duty might mean for Game Pass. So interesting that that's what they honed in on. Now, we don't know how this legal challenge is going to play out, but I would love to get your guys' thoughts on it. And what's the prediction? Do we see this deal finally closing at some point? Is this just posturing? Is this what is the purpose here of the FTC's lawsuit? Do you guys think? And could it sink this acquisition altogether? Jimmy, maybe start with you, or Lindsay, if you have thoughts.
Yeah, I can start real quick just because I want to point out that there's going to be several think pieces on this by people who have the antitrust experience far more than I do. So that's the first thing. I will say historically, when I've seen and when I worked in technology policy, a lot of times that the suing or the legal challenges happen and they don't necessarily put a pause on the merger. It does lengthen the process, but it can also at times add in built-in consumer protections and requirements. So, and I'm not necessarily saying this is a good thing or a bad thing, but I do know, for example, during the Sprint T-Mobile merger, there was very specific requirements put in to protect low-income customers, which wound up actually being helpful to those consumers at the end of the day. The thing that makes me kind of sad about these kinds of things is the length of time it takes, and that stops development and progress and growth and all of that. If there was a faster way to do this process to basically have a challenge that ensures consumers are protected, I would be all about it. I don't necessarily know that that's going to be this process. I think it's going to be lengthy and ugly. I hope that there are some positive results from it that benefit the gaming community and leave access open to all people, but that remains yet to be seen.
Lindsay, do you think it closes this deal?
No, these challenges, I don't. And again, there's going to be greater legal minds about this. I'm so curious to see what Jimmy has to say. I don't think there's not many times. Oracle and Microsoft was a previous example, I believe, but that was from the 90s. There's not a lot of energy around stopping these deals these days. There's a lot of talk about breaking up big tech, but what actions have we seen in the past 10 years that have indicated anything other than, Facebook was allowed to buy WhatsApp and Instagram and all these other things. So I don't think that it stops this deal.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it stops it either. And Paul, I shared here in chat with you another link on this. This was provided to us actually by Matt. So thank you and shout out to Matt, where basically suggesting that the European Union Commission opposes the FTC lawsuit. And so you have an entire region, separate governing body, which seems likely in favor of the acquisition. And so, the FTC, I'm sure, has their own reasons. But what I loved about the second story, particularly this quote from the EU Commission that says the absence of competition concerns did not rely on any statements made by Microsoft about the future distribution strategy. So, you have this lawsuit with concerns about, unfair trade policies, perhaps, or some type of monopoly. And the EU saying you're not even taking into account what Microsoft's saying about what they're going to do with the IP. And Microsoft, if we've covered all of these Phil Spencer stories, right? Wanting to get Call of Duty on Nintendo Switch, extending and guaranteeing Call of Duty on PlayStation for 10 years, unable to put Call of Duty on Game Pass, I think, until after 2024. So all of these different things that they're mitigating those concerns that maybe were overlooked in the filing, something I haven't read personally. It's one of these unfortunate things that slows down, I think, the partnership. That's going to slow down in inevitability, but I don't think, like I said, that it's going to stop it completely. It's just legal recourse for the I don't know, to address, perhaps try and get some last minute chips out of the deal, right? The FTC's, maybe, hey, we're creating a big stink, and maybe Microsoft says, all right, well, we'll sweeten the pot and fold on a couple of minor terms here and there. So that's what it
You
seems like
think
to
that's
me
the
more than
purpose?
anything.
Jimmy, they're trying to extract some kind of concessions from Microsoft.
That's my gut take on this, Paul, based off of this overwhelming support from the EU Commission, from all of the press we've seen out of Microsoft for the last, this has been going on for 11 months now, right? This was announced January last year. So there's, no shortage of news coverage that we've had on this topic in general. And the fact that it's delayed so long, I think, is really a disservice to these two companies, to what we all found to be a great acquisition, not only for Microsoft, but bailing another publicly traded company out of some very hot water and problems with leadership that were, unfortunately exposed through numerous public filings that were happening before this. So, yeah, I do honestly feel like it's just the way you summarize it. They're trying to extract some last minute concessions on otherwise what looks to be a pretty clear deal.
Lindsay, I liked your point on distraction. The good news is Activision-Blizzard doesn't actually make any games anymore, so they can't really get that distracted, right? That's
true. I also want to emphasize Jamie's point about the EU Commission. The EU is typically much tougher on big tech, so if there is support there for it, that definitely should tip the scales here.
Interesting. Jeff, any thoughts on this before I read?
No, I think those were good points. Lindsay, your last point about the EU, that was what was interesting to me, with the juxtaposition there, particularly because Microsoft's a US brand. So you would think, if anything, the FTC would be, if they were going to play favorite, I think they would favor Microsoft over Sony, given it's just a US company. But I guess their job is to protect consumers. But again, we all highlighted, I just don't see how this deal is bad for consumers if Microsoft's saying they're going to keep Call of Duty on Sony for however long. And it always seems to me that this deal has always been about Game Pass and getting more value into Game Pass, not taking Call of Duty exclusive to Game Pass or exclusive to Microsoft. And consumers should be benefited by that. The more value you put in the Game Pass subscription, that helps consumers, right? If you can still get it even if it's not in Game Pass, then who gets harmed by it being in Game Pass?
Tinfoil hat theory. Someone at the FTC is a big PlayStation fanboy. Where they want to make sure they're going to get their game. Jimmy.
No, I had that same thought. I love that you voiced it.
Chris says that COD Hail Mary to Nintendo Switch makes sense now. Yeah, they've been doing everything to try and direct the narrative in this sort of hey, we're going to play nice with everybody. And so, yeah, you're right, Chris, in that context, it does make sense. Christian says, which will come first, Half-Life 3 or this merger? Definitely this merger. No question. Half-Life 3, Christian, I hate to break it to you, never coming. Matt says, why would the EU Commission do that if they're also worried about this leading to a antitrust / doing their own investigation? Well, clearly they feel like their fears have been alleviated, right? You guys have a different take on that?
No, I agree with you.
Matt says, or am I misunderstanding the lawsuit? Well, the lawsuit's coming from the FTC, not from the EU Commission.
Right.
So a different regulatory body.